Chapter 18. Stealing Gaza's gas. On September 13, 1993, the Oslo Agreement was signed, marking the basis for a peaceful accord between Israel and the Palestinians. The 1994 Gaza-Jericho Agreement outlined specific steps needed to realize the general provisions of the Oslo Agreement. Under its terms, the Gazan fishermen were free to use a marine corridor extending 20 nautical miles from the Gaza shore, bounded by restricted, or border, zones to the north and south abutting Israeli and Egyptian waters. However, beginning in late 2000, the Israeli military initiated a continuing campaign of intimidation and harassment against fishing boats that ventured near, or beyond a 6 nautical mile limit. 1. Their patrol boats attacked and harassed the fishermen on a daily basis. To date, the Israelis have killed 15 and wounded over 200 fishermen. Among the warships used were ones in the Dabba and Vora classes. Their armaments include 20mm to 30mm cannon, machine guns, automatic grenade launchers, plus high-pressure water cannons. Some have 700-mile ranges and top speeds of 52 knots. Originally they were built in the US, but, in recent years, they are constructed by Israel Aircraft at a plant in the Negev. No formal notice or explanation of restrictions was ever given to the Palestinians. Instead, any regulations have been written and enforced by Israeli machine guns and water cannons. Since the Operation Cast Lead ceasefire, their attacks have become more aggressive, often occurring within a few hundred yards of the shore. Even the people of Gaza, walking on their beaches, have been wounded by gunfire intended for the fishing boats. The fishermen continue to be killed, wounded, or arrested. Their boats continue to be targeted or impounded. The noose of the siege grows tighter. Israeli attack on Gazan fishing boats. Why? A timeline. For the first 50 years after Israel's founding, the country explored extensively for natural gas or oil deposits with little success. Approximately 400 onshore and 25 offshore, mainly exploratory wells, were dug during that period. Israel was obliged to import 85% of its energy needs by buying coal and petroleum products from Egypt, Russia, Mexico and elsewhere. September 13, 1993, the Oslo Agreement was signed, laying the basis for peaceful relations between Israel and the Palestinians. May 4, 1994, PLO chairman Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the Gaza-Jericho Agreement as part of the subsequent procedures called for in the Oslo Agreement. Article 11 established 3 maritime activity zones that extended 20 nautical miles out to sea from the coast of Gaza. 2 narrow zones running parallel to the boundaries of Egyptian and Israeli waters were designated no fishing areas. Under the terms of the agreement, the larger remaining zone will be open for fishing, recreation, and economic activities. For the next 6 years, the Gazan fishermen operated freely within the zone with no major confrontations by the Israelis. In addition, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Part 5, describes an exclusive economic zone, EEZ, that would grant Gaza control of all seabed assets up to 200 nautical miles from its shore. 3. There is speculation that vast deposits of natural gas are located beyond the 20-mile maritime activity zone. Such a resource would give Gaza the potential of becoming another DB in a relatively short period, if they were allowed to develop their own deposits. 4. Eastern Mediterranean gas fields off the coasts of Egypt, Gaza and Israel, from Israeli invasion, and Gaza's offshore gas fields by Michel Chasudovsky. The 9th of January 2009. Pacific Free Press. An interview regarding maritime activity zone and EEZ. 1999. The British Gas Group, BG Group, discovered a vast deposit of natural gas within Gaza's maritime activity zone. Over 1.3 trillion cubic feet, equal to 150 million barrels of oil, were estimated to be there. Located about 15 miles off the coast, the deposits were named Gaza Marine 1 and 2. It was estimated that there were sufficient reserves to generate electric power for all Palestinian needs for a decade and still have a surplus to export. 5. On November 8, 1999, Chairman Yasser Arafat signed an agreement giving BG Group 90% interest and 10% to Consolidated Contractors Company. an Athens-based Palestinian entity connected to the PLO. They and the Palestinian Investment Fund, PIF, had the option to later assume up to 40% interest. A final allocation of the rights continues to be contested between BG Group Israel, Egypt, and the Palestinians in obscured ongoing negotiations. July 25, 2000, Yasser Arafat walked out on the Camp David meeting. 6. September 27, 2000, Yasser Arafat traveled 19 miles off the Gaza coast to light the first flare stack flowing up from the natural gas deposit. An Israeli oil consortium had contested the Palestinian rights to the gas, but this suit was overturned in an Israeli court. Original estimates for development and production expenses were in the area of $2 billion. Profits were estimated at another $2 billion. In the initial stages, BG considered running an underwater pipeline 20 nautical miles from Gaza Marine directly to Gaza, where it would be used in retrofitted generators to provide power. Excess gas would be piped to the West Bank, or converted to liquid natural gas, LNG, for export to foreign buyers. 7. This plan was abandoned when Ariel Sharon announced that the Israelis would never buy the gas directly from the Palestinians. At that point, the BG Group negotiated with Egypt to run an undersea pipeline to a plant at El Arish, Egypt. The gas would then be piped to Israel, so that they would not have to deal directly with the Palestinians. Under pressure from Tony Blair, BG Group was forced to negotiate with the Israelis instead, who wanted the pipe to run directly to Ashkelon. Those discussions were so long and contentious that ultimately the BG Group closed their Israel office and again began dealing with Egypt. 8. September 28, 2000, Ariel Sharon visited the Temple Mount despite warnings by Arafat and other leading Palestinians. The predictable riots and deaths following this provocation marked the beginning of the Second Intifada. As a result, Sharon was elected Prime Minister in February 2001. 9. He reaffirmed that Israel would never buy gas from the Palestinians. After the outbreak of the Second Intifada, the Israelis began an ever-tightening blockade of Gaza, with fewer and fewer trucks, and no foreign boats allowed to enter. Late 2000, attacks by Israeli patrol boats against Gazan fishing boats began, and have continued to this day. These attacks started only after the discovery of the natural gas deposits and 5 years before Hamas freely won the legislative elections on January 25, 2006. 10. It is apparent that these assaults on the fishermen had nothing to do with security or with Hamas. Instead, it had everything to do with Israel controlling a $4 billion resource belonging to the Palestinians. In the late 1990s, Noble Energy, based in Houston, Texas, began explorations for natural gas off the Israeli coast in conjunction with Israeli partners Avner Oil and Delek Drilling. March 2000, Noble Energy announced the discovery of the Mary B natural gas deposit located approximately 15 miles offshore and close to the Gaza marine zones. Initial estimates projected reserves exceeding 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. In 2003, a platform was completed, and gas began flowing through a pipeline to Ashkelon. Until 2009, the Mary B reserve remained the only sizable reserve found in Israeli territory. Although it was a significant deposit, it did not approach meeting Israel's energy needs, and was a finite resource. While there is no hard evidence supporting speculation at this time, it appears quite possible for the Israelis to access the gas deposits located in Gaza Marine from the Mary B platform. Slant drilling techniques now allow bits to reach up to 25,000 feet horizontally from a standing platform. Iraq accused Kuwait of stealing its oil using such a technique before the First Gulf War. 11. October 2001. Following the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. State Department included both Hamas and Hezbollah on their terrorist list. August 2002. In response to a request from Prime Minister Sharon, the Secretary-General of the United Nations appointed Ms. Catherine Bertoni as his personal humanitarian envoy to assess the humanitarian needs of the Palestinians. At the end of her visit to the area, she made numerous recommendations, including one that dealt with the fishing boats. In her report, she included a list of previous commitments made by Israel. Item 2 states The fishing zone for Palestinian fishing boats off the Gaza coast is 12 nautical miles. This policy needs to be fully implemented, 12, but it never was. Despite Burton's recommendations, Israeli attacks became more frequent on fishing boats that passed a 6-mile limit. Most boats carried a GPS, so they can determine their exact positions. Some captains were intimidated by the Israeli threats and turned back before crossing the no-go line. Others continued to go farther out despite the increased danger of attack. The fishery closer to shore has collapsed after so many boats were forced to operate in such a limited area. In addition, the waters near shore are polluted due to sewage pouring in from broken pipes. This is one more example of an infrastructure crippled by the Israelis. 13. Before the siege, Gaza's fishermen caught 3,000 tons of fish each year. Now it is less than 500 tons. The most productive fishing months for the Gazans are in the winter and spring. At that time, an annual migration of fish traveling from the Nile Delta to Turkish waters pass through the zone 10 miles and further from shore. The incentive to go beyond the 6-mile limit is very strong. In addition to firing cannons and machine guns at any other fishing boats, the Israelis periodically introduce noxious chemical substances into the water, fired from their boats, that leaves a foul odor on any fish or crewman on deck. It is probable that the chemicals are the same used by the Israelis in crowd control on land. Under the Chemical Weapons Convention of 1997, it is specified each state party undertakes not to use riot control agents as a method of warfare. 14. On occasion, the patrol boats have purposely rammed into fishing boats, damaging the vessels and endangering the crew. Numerous times the Israelis have forced fishermen to jump into the water and remain there for up to 3 hours until they are exhausted and close to hypothermia. Periodically, the Israelis impound fishing boats and take them and their crews to Ashdod, Israel, or some other port. The crewmen are generally released after being photographed and interrogated. The boats are held for indefinite periods. Captured fishermen report that the Israelis pressure them to become informers in exchange for the freedom to fish. 15. The 9th of December 2005, Israel announced that it had ended the occupation of Gaza and withdrew its forces. But it continued to maintain control of air and sea lanes as well as all border crossings on land. The amount of vehicular traffic remained extremely limited and never approached a typical pre-occupation daily level. The ability for persons to enter or leave Gaza continued to be restricted. Permission or denial for passage was often arbitrary and unpredictable. The conditions of an occupation continue to prevail. The 25th of January 2006, Hamas won 76 of 132 seats in the Palestinian Legislative Council in an open, honest election. After a bloody battle with Fatah element that was supported by both Israeli and US interests, Hamas took control of Gaza. Israel and the United States immediately reiterated that Hamas was a terrorist organization and that they would continue to have no public contact with it. The restrictions at the border crossings would tighten further, with even more severe limitations on the admission of produce, materials, medicines, and people. Anemia and malnutrition are widespread as a result. Early June 2008, Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak instructed the Israel Defense Forces to secretly prepare for an invasion of Gaza, later known as Operation Cast Lead. 16. June 2008, Israel contacted BG Group to propose renewing negotiations over the natural gas deposits. Actual negotiations overseen by Ehud Olmert were taking place in October 2008. It appears that Israel wished to reach an agreement with BG Group before the secretly planned invasion began. 17. The 19th of June 2008, Hamas and Israel signed a 6-month truce agreement calling for cessation of rocket firings by Hamas and military incursions by Israel. In May 2008, over 300 rockets had been fired. Hamas was led to believe that significant increase in shipments would be allowed to enter Gaza. Before the truce, roughly 70 trucks were allowed to bring provisions into Gaza each day, compared with some 900 permitted before the Israeli clampdown in 2000. Hamas was led to believe that a similar flow of traffic would be restored. Instead, Israel allowed only an increase from the 70 to 90 trucks. 18. The 23rd of August 2008, two boats, the Liberty and Free Gaza, sailed into Gaza harbor from Cyprus carrying 44 international supporters of the Palestinians,